Hello and welcome to the homework preview for Coin War. One of the aspects of this program is that you have to build the army based on input that you get from the command line. So how do we do that? We can either have the input for the army is written in a text file, or we can have the person, the player, the human, type in random or the positions for the armies. So let's see what that can look like. Let's take a look inside the folder first. I'm on the Windows machine, so the commands that I'm using are for Windows. And let's take a look inside. We have coinwar.py. That's where all of my code is. And for this preview, I have game1.txt and game2.txt. Let's take a look inside of these files. So in game 1, it's a text file that just says random. The program should read that and see that first line and say, hey, let's generate a random army for player 1 and let's generate a random army for player 2. Awesome. Let's take a look at game2.txt, and this file says position on the first line, and on the second line it says THHTT, and the third line says TTHTH. So what this means is that the program, if it sees this file in particular, it looks at the first line and sees position and says, oh, okay, we are going to now look at the second line because the first line said position. So let's move to the second line and get the position for player 1's army. So this should create an army for player 1 that is tails, heads, heads, tails, tails. And then it looks at the next line and creates the army for player 2 being tails, tails, heads, tails, heads. Now, this is how it should work. Let's see that it does work in this way. So we are going to start the program from the command line by typing Python 3. And the name of the program, coinwar.py, and the less than sign for a standard input, and let's do game1.txt first. Look at that, the program ran. It ran using game1 as the input. Game1.txt says it's supposed to be random. So we generated two teams, player 1 with heads, heads, tails, 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 and player 2 with heads, tails, tails, heads, tails, and it looks like this game is a tie. Let's run the game again to make sure that it is random. Even though it's random, it can still generate the same team, but hopefully, because it's a bit more complicated, the team should be different this time. So let's run it with game1.txt again. And look at that, we have a different team. Player 1's team is now tails, tails, heads, heads, tails, and player 2's team is tails, 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 heads, heads. And in this match, or this game, player 1 is the winner. So I think it is safe to say that the game works using the random text file, the file that just says random. Now let's try it with game2.txt and see if it works with the position file. So we call up Python and then the name of the file, less than sign, game2.txt, and hit enter. The program runs. Player 1's team is tails, heads, heads, tails, tails. Player 2's team is tails, tails, heads, tails, heads, and player 2 is the winner. But wait, let's make sure that the team matches. Let's take a look inside game2.txt again. So this file says position. So the program said, hey, I see that there is something that says position on the first line. So now let's look at the second line, THHTT. So let's use that for player 1's army. Does player 1's army match in the game? Does it match the file? THHTT, it matches. Does player 2 match? Tails, tails, heads, tails, heads. TTHTH. There's a match. And in this case, player 2 wins. So that was the game using the files that were already created. But what if you don't want to make a file and you just want to type in that you want the game to be random, or that you want to have the game use a position that you come up with? Well, the program that I wrote uses both styles. It can either read from a text file or it can read from input typed into the command line. Your program, like I said before, does not have to do both. It has to do one, and you should specify that in the README file for the graders. The graders should know from your README if your game is meant to be played using the text file or if it's meant to be played using standard input where the person manually types out position, manually types out tails, tails, heads, for example. So let's see what that looks like. So here we go with Python 3, coinwar.py, and no less than sign. I am just going to hit enter. Now the program is waiting for some input. Let's try it with the word random. I hit enter, and on Windows we have to do Control-Z, then enter again. And hey, look, the game just ran. It created a team for player 1, 4 heads followed by tails, and it created a team for player 2, heads, tails, tails, heads, heads, and it says that player 1 wins. Was it random? Let's try it again. We should get a different outcome this time, unless the teams are the same. That is a possibility when using random functions. So let's see. We run it again. It is waiting for my input. I type random, hit enter, Control-Z, hit enter, and we indeed have 2 different teams. This time player 1 has an army that is all tails, and player 2 has an army that is tails, heads, heads, heads. In this case, both teams are different from the first time that we ran it using random. So I think it is safe to say that the random function that was created for this program works because the teams are different. But now let's see, how do we create a team manually by typing in the teams themselves, one letter at a time. So Python 3, coinwar.py, we hit enter, and this time instead of typing random, we are going to type position, hit enter, and then we will create the team. Since the last game we played, player 1 had all tails, let's give player 1 all H's, H, 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 H. That looks like 5 H's. We hit enter, and player 2 will have all tails this time. And let's see if it works, and then see who wins. So I hit enter, Control-Z, hit enter, and it looks like the game created an army for player 1 that was all heads, because that's what we typed, and it created an army for player 2 that was all tails, because that's what we typed. And in this case, player 1 won because they had all heads, and heads beats tails in this game. So let's try it again. Coinwar, Python 3, coinwar.py, enter. It is waiting for our input, and we're going to type position, enter. Let's make things interesting. Let's do heads, tails, tails, heads, heads for player 1, and heads, 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 tails, tails for player 2. Enter, Control-Z, enter, and when we run it, the teams match. We have HTTH for player 1. This was my input. And then here's what the game did, HTTH for player 1. And then we did HHHTT for player 2. And we got HHHTT for player 2 in the actual game. And it looks like player 2 won the match. So that is what the game should look like when it is being played. You type in the name of the well, you type in Python 3, and then the name of the file that has your code. And if you are reading from an external file for the teams, it'll be the less than sign, then game1.txt, or whatever you named your text file, or it is the name of the test files that were included. You should run those and see if you get similar results. Or you run it without the less than sign, hit enter. That's if you are choosing to use input, the standard input, without the text file. And the program will then wait for the player to type something random. And then they end the file that they technically are making like this file object that Python reads as the external file. And in this case, it was a temporary file that had the word random inside of it. And then the program ran with with 2 random teams for player 1 and player 2. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please reach out to us via email or Discord or D2L. All right, thanks and have a wonderful day.